Welcome to the Indian Silicon Valley podcast. I'm your host Jivraj, and in this episode, I speak with Chaitanya of WakeFit. WakeFit is a home solutions and sleep solutions company that crossed 200 crores in revenue in the last financial year. One of the foremost D2C brands of the country, WakeFit has been built with much care and consideration. Chaitanya is one of the foremost entrepreneurs I've spoken to who has much clarity, humility, and simplicity built in to the amazingly structured and innovative thoughts. We speak all about D2C and much more throughout our conversation, and Chaitanya actually proves to us what it means to disrupt with first principles as he has done with his co founder at WakeFit. Join in for an amazing conversation and tell us how you liked it by watching till the end of the episode. Thank you so much for joining in. Let's dive in. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Chaitanya of WakeFit on the show. Thank you so much, Chaitanya, for joining me. It's such a pleasure to host you.
Thanks for having me here, Jivraj. Good to be here.
Glad to hear that, Chaitanya. And it's always such a pleasure to talk to the creator of a product you so dearly love. So that's on top of it. And thanks for building such an amazing brand. But to begin with, I'd like to perhaps, question something which is very fundamental. And Vinod Khosla puts this extremely well, that no great innovation actually comes from a great institution. So the mattresses industry was not breaking through by, let's say, a Kurlon. It was done by through WakeFit. So addressing it head on, how did you enter a market which was traditionally known as, which is dominated by offline selling, which was dominated by larger players? And what was your first principles approach to perhaps address the market, address the problem at hand? And how did you begin your journey with WakeFit?
I think we different people talk about first principles and think about first principles very differently.
Right.
For us, it was pretty simple. Question everything around you. Don't take anything for granted. Anything that is there, don't take it that it's cast in stone. That was a simple approach that we took, and that also came because of our past learning. Ankit, my co-founder, and me, we both are standard, run-of-the-mill, middle-class Indians, where our parents were either in a PSU or in a government department, worked in transferable jobs. So we as kids have seen multiple different cities while growing up. And then we did the standard thing, finish your BTech, then work for a few years. And Ankit directly went into his first startup, and I did my MBA, did my consulting, worked in the US, and then did my first startup. So I'm about 8, 9 years older than Ankit, and very, very simple. And we tried our first startup. So Ankit's first startup was in a B2B space. And he came up with an innovation where the cost of raw materials could be saved in foaming by about 20%. Unfortunately for him, a large multinational such as Dow Chemicals was approaching the same problem, but from a different angle. So when the same innovation was cracked by a larger firm, it simply became a matter of credit period. It did not matter whether it was Ankit or whether it was Dow. The purchaser was simply looking at what is the credit period I'm getting from the seller.
Right.
So the innovation itself didn't hold much value. The second thing is, as a B2B company, you don't own too much of a brand reputation because you're not dealing with a B2C consumer. So that was his big takeaway and learning from his startup. For me, after 6 years post MBA, nearly 8, 9 years, being nearly 30 years when I did my first startup, within 10 months, the first startup shut down. And then in the next 2 years, 2.5 years, I did my second startup, which also failed spectacularly. Lost all of my money. And Ankit also in his first startup, he had lost all of his money. Coincidentally, both of us landed up in the same Sequoia funded startup. Uh, he used to be in my team, and we sort of struck up a friendship because our journeys were very similar, although it was 8 years apart. We had both landed up there because our bank balances were zero. Um, and we sort of connected, ended up talking, stayed in touch, became friends. And then when he had this idea that the mattress industry is extremely overpriced for any normal consumer, we approached it with a simple mathematics. So he knew the cost of foaming, he knew the
Mhm.
cost of labor, I
Mhm.
knew the cost of marketing because my startups were in that space. And finally, we said, if a mattress manufacturing and marketing is costing this much, why is it actually being sold at that much?
Right.
It's a simple premise that we explored. And then our first hypothesis was, oh my God, these mattress companies must be making ton of money. So what did I do next? I went to Ministry of Corporate Affairs website and downloaded their financials.
Right.
And the next thing I know, I realized their profits are very, very thin,
Mhm.
barely 5% profit after tax and 10% EBITDA. So
Right.
then where is the money going? It's
Mhm.
costs very less. Customers are paying so much, but
Mhm.
the companies itself are not making money, and
Right.
they're not doing any innovation from 50, 60 years. So where is it going? So that gave us the clue that it's just going in the supply chain.
Right.
Distributors, super stockists, everybody was taking a cut. And by the time it reaches your doorstep, it was costing a bomb. It was as simple as that.
Right.
So first principles thinking came from basically Ankit trying to get married and wanting to buy a mattress for himself, and then we realizing all of this.
Great, great to hear that. But you put it so simply, yet so fundamentally, if we can question everything around us with everything that we know and combine it with, each and every question that we think of, that would be spectacular. So wonderful line of thought and great context to build as well. But, on to present day now. And I'd love to hear about you, that, let's say 5 years in, 200 crores in revenue, so many clients, and a loved community overall, right? And that customer redefining the way people look at consumers and walking the talk of consumer is the king instead of just writing a tweet about it, right? So what I'm now trying to eye at and would love to understand from you that you've seen the startup ecosystem evolve in and out, right? From business school to startups which have failed in your opinion, but I think you've had some great learnings from that and that is reflecting. So how have you seen the ecosystem evolve, and what is it like to build a D2C brand? Because everybody's talking of this buzzword D2C, consumer brands. What is this? If you can, demystify for us, that would be wonderful.
Sure. I think you're absolutely right. I did my first startup in 2011 end. So back then, Flipkart was just taking off. Shopclose, Snapdeal, they were all coming in.
Mhm.
And if I have to take a look back at what has happened in the ecosystem, there have always been cycles of startups that are always hot.
Right.
So first, it was e-commerce.
Mhm.
Then came ride hailing, which is Uber, Ola, Taxi for sure. There was a
Mhm.
ton of innovation and funding and startups around that, copycats, all of that.
Right.
Then came hyperlocal. So
Mhm.
everybody wanted to get into hyperlocal delivery,
Right.
from Grofers to Dunzo to, I mean, different people approached it differently.
Mhm.
If you remember how Tiny Owl, how many companies that were there that actually shut down,
Right.
because that it became a fad. It became a sort of a cyclical thing where different companies played a different role. And currently, if you look at the market, edtech is extremely hot.
Right.
So every 2 or 3 years, different factors converge and sort of make one sector very, very hot in the startup world.
Right.
But as Warren Buffett says, if you are knowing that a sector is hot today, which means you're already too late.
Right.
So if you look at all of those things, you'll notice that people who are extremely serious about the business, those are the guys who ended up surviving. Those who started because it was an opportune thing, because it was hot, those guys didn't survive.
Right.
Uh, because it's never fun to run a business, go through all the ups and downs, suffer through every single pain if you're not passionate about that problem. Because
Right.
you're a tourist, you're opportunist, you're just trying it out because it is hot. And when the tough times come, one after the other, as they're bound to, you will just give up and shut the startup. But those guys who survive are those that say that this is the problem, this is my karma bhumi, I will bloody solve this no matter what.
Right.
Those are the guys who ended up surviving each of those ups and downs.
Right.
Uh, so currently, the D2C thing is very, very hot, like you rightly said. In simple terms, D2C is direct to consumer,
Mhm.
where the brand itself is doing its R&D, in some cases even manufacturing, and finally, it is coming directly to the consumer's home without passing through any middlemen.
Mhm.
In traditional retail, there used to be distributor, super stockist or stockist, then a retailer, then finally the dealer in the end where you would walk into the store. So 3 or 4 levels of middlemen would be there. D2C is bypassing all of that. Either they sell through their own showrooms or through their own apps and websites, or through a single marketplace, which is Amazon, Flipkart, Myntra, Nykaa, Purple, whichever is suitable for them, they come to the consumer's doorstep through that. That is, in simple terms, direct to consumer.
Fair, fair. So, like, as a follow-up to that as well, how has it been for you to actually, build a D2C brand with great branding, great consumer base, great loyalty, and, all of that mixture that anybody aspires to build? How has your experience been building that in the broader context before we move on to a couple of specifics about the brand itself?
Sure. Uh, the beautiful part about D2C is that it has democratized access to products.
Mm-hmm.
So a consumer does not necessarily need to buy only those products that he hears or sees on TV or newspaper anymore,
Right.
because those are extremely expensive, and only really large companies like HUL, PNG, Reckitt, they would be able to afford those spends on TV, newspaper, radio, and reach you, and then you would end up buying them.
Mm-hmm.
But D2C has democratized it, which means now I can get the word out to you on Google and Facebook. I can reach out to you through my own app or website, or I can even reach out to you and tell you that I have a great review through Amazon and Flipkart and Myntra. So consumers now suddenly have a really wide choice of products.
Mm-hmm.
So the positive for a D2C company is now I'm not dependent on cash, I'm dependent on a great quality product.
Right.
The negative of that is because everything is so democratized and everybody can say positive and negative things out there. If you don't have your game up there, uh, you're going to be really maligned in the public space by consumers, because
Right.
everybody has a Twitter account, everybody has a review account on Amazon,
Right.
everybody can go and say negative things about you on Facebook.
Right.
So while it is a great thing for us to reach out to consumers, we also have to be extremely cognizant that building a great D2C brand means you're always on top of every single unhappy customer and trying to solve them. And imagine the scale when we are shipping out 10,000 orders a day. Even if it is 0.5%, it's such a large number that every day, if something goes wrong, supposing delivery is missed by 2 hours,
Mm-hmm.
delivery or installation, one of the products, the screws didn't go in the right packet.
Right.
So it's causing them pain. That's why they're complaining. They don't have anything against us.
Right. Right.
It's causing them genuine pain. Somebody would have ordered it because their parents are coming from another city.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody is ordering it because they're having a baby next week. Somebody is ordering because their sister is getting married. So when we breach those promises, it really pains them.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and if I have to put all of this in a simple sentence on what it means to take a D2C brand and build it, it is you are going to lose sleep over every customer's pain point.
Wow.
That is as simple as that. If you, even now, after 4.5, 5 years, Ankit and I both start our days and end our days with negative reviews. Why did this customer come here? Why did he get unhappy? Why did he have to write? If he had to go here and write, it means it has pained him. And if one person is writing, it means 10 other people are going through the same pain. It's just that they're not going and writing. So
Right.
how do I identify the problem and solve it? So none of the funding, none of the marketing makes any sense if your customers are unhappy, because they will say bad things and they will truly mean it, and that is never a good for a company.
Wow, I mean, 5, 10 minutes into this conversation, and I'm already almost spellbound by the simplicity and the direct nature of how simplified you've put this across, Rain. Because it's so easy if you just look at, the pain point of the consumer, and if we just are maligned every time the consumer is maligned, and if we can probably rectify it going forward. So beautiful line of answering. Thank you so much for that, Chaitanya. And moving ahead, let's dive into a couple of specifics about building WakeFit, right? So the first question in chronological order, because that would give us more context, is given that you did start and you did tell us, what was the market hypothesis, can you tell us a bit about, how did you know that, this is where we have PMF? What was that sign for you? And how did you double down on that and know that, this is what we're going to do? Because from what I know now, that you now have the distribution channel all by yourself, you have the manufacturing by yourself, and I'm sure you didn't start off like that, right? So what was the thought process like, and what was the market telling you when you started off? What was that journey like for you?
Uh, when we started off, we honestly didn't have too many grand visions. Like I said, Ankit was coming out of one failed startup. I had come out of two failed ones, and we had barely saved 2 to 3 lakhs each in our new salary. And now here we are trying to start again, put the whole thing again. And I don't even know what people around us were thinking. These guys have gone nuts. Uh, but there was no grand ambition. It was that, can we do something on our own, try once more, and see where it goes. And for us, product market fit, um, the growth curve, the stick type growth that, say, Paul Graham or Mark Zuckerberg or those guys talk about, none of that mattered. For us, what mattered was, if one customer placed an order and he discovered us, which is an unknown, completely unknown company with no advertising,
Mhm.
and he's ended up buying from us, we better make sure that he's happy.
Right.
And it was very, very simple in the beginning, when there was just one order a day, one order every 2 days. So one customer, and just treat him like a king, make him happy. Simple. And at that time, both of us had not quit our jobs. We were just doing it on the side. And then it started becoming a trickle of, say, 2, 3 orders a day. At that point, Ankit quit and he joined full time, while I continued to work in the evenings and weekends and continue to put money, support, all of that. Then it steadily became 8 to 10 orders a day.
Wow.
Uh, and then we figured out that, okay, this seems to be there. We are one of the first people that we're trying to do. And let us just talk to every single person that is buying, because anyway, the number of people is less and we don't have so much work anymore. Because
Right.
there's one or two guys is going to 8, 10 guys. How much time does it take to call 8 guys?
Right.
So we ended up calling, and that became a treasure trove of information.
Right.
As soon as customers found out that we are a startup, they would give Gyan. If they're in our same city, we would actually go land up in their house. Some
Wow.
of the initial deliveries have been done in Ankit's car. So customers were just open in welcoming us into their home, giving us chai, talking to us, saying, "Arey, mattress is all good, but the packaging that you sent, I thought I had made a mistake. It didn't really give me confidence that it's a good company. How can you send it in a gunny bag? How can you send it in a folded format?"
Mhm.
So the kind of information that they gave became a treasure trove of raw material for us to improve the product.
Wow.
And so that became a loop. We would sell only few, we would engage with the customers deeply, take their feedback and improve it. And those customers would then go ahead and tell through three other people around them.
Right.
So that became 1, 2 orders a day to 8, 10 orders to then 50 orders a day to then 100 orders a day. And there was no particular time at which we felt we had hit PMF, because at always somebody or the other was either trying to copy us, trying to kill us. So there was no place where we said, there was no aha moment saying that, oh, we have hit PMF. Now we need to double down. There was no such thing. It kept increasing. We put our heads down and work more. Kept increasing, put our heads and work more. So it just became a virtuous cycle. And I don't know if you'll believe it, for the first 16 months, we did not have a Google or Facebook account.
Wow.
So literally no advertising. So we had a Facebook presence, obviously. We started posting some basic uh, creative posts about sleep, about mattress, spinal health, and so forth, but no ad accounts, because we couldn't afford it. And then September 2017, we incorporated the company in March 2016,
Mhm.
although we were experimenting from late 2015.
Mhm.
August, September 2017 is when we opened our ad accounts and started spending a small amount of money. So I think
Wow.
that true PMF now in hindsight looks like, when we were growing without any advertising, that was true PMF for me.
Right. Right. I cannot imagine what it must have been like to probably, as they call it, grow without spending anything, like zero CAC, and only organic growth. And it speaks for itself, in fact. Like, I can imagine that. I did not find it then, but I would have loved to. And I know that whenever I go to somebody's place and, if their mattress is not that fulfilling, I'd be like, why don't you check this out, right? And they go ahead and buy it. So I can imagine that and I can perceive it. So, but it's wonderful to hear this. And it does make me, in fact, recall, as you said, Paul Graham's one of quotes, he mentions that doing things that don't scale. And you've done that so well in the initial part of your journey. And through that, I want to, interestingly touch upon that in some of your previous interviews, you've mentioned that you cannot go with a preconceived notion into the market, and there has to be a way you talk to customers and listen to them, right? And that is a particularly peculiar thing, because at the onset it may seem like a very straightforward thing, right? Go to a consumer, ask them how the experience was. But you, by contrast, have mentioned that there can be intricate details to it, and if we get that wrong, we're actually chasing the wrong code, the wrong ball, right? So can you perhaps throw a bit of light there, and what your thought process was, and what exactly should be the way that you actually observe things? Like, are you looking for answers, or are you looking for behavior, or are you looking for user reviews, or what have you? So I would love to understand from you.
Very interesting question. Uh, I remember this case study of Nokia coming up with this phone 1100. I think it had a torch.
Right.
And it was like really robust. It was very thin and small, and it had a torch.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember this case study where the way they came up with that was because they observed in consumer homes how they were using the phone. Back then, there were no smartphones; these were
Mm-hmm.
feature phones, and so they were observing how they're using it. So they people would not have good street lights, so the phone would fall down. Then they would have to go look for something, and they would in Indian cities. There's a lot of oil on your hands, the grease from the skin, and there's a lot of dust.
Mm-hmm.
And kids in the home always used to take it up and play snake or other games.
Right.
So when they observed all of this, the result was a very robust phone, which was dust resistant and grease resistant, and it had a torch because Indian streets and other places were so poorly lit. So no way this could have been understood by questioning you.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you question, there are two things that happen. One, the person who's posing the question has a bias or a hypothesis already in his mind. So he's trying to navigate subconsciously to get there. The person who's answering has a bias of seeming smart. He'll be thinking, if I give this answer, he'll think I'm a dumbo. If I give this answer, he'll think I'm a very, very smart consumer.
Right.
I'll seem cooler.
Yeah.
I'll seem more respectable. I've seemed like I've given it a lot of thought.
Right.
So that never works out well. That's why consumer research, and when people say these many people said this, they said that, you just take it with a pinch of salt.
Mm-hmm.
True answers come by observing what they say, observing what they're not saying, observing how they're using the product, observing video recordings of their behavior on the website, then peppering them with questions which are extremely open ended. You can never ask pointed questions. You can never give them A, B, C, D. In a survey, you give options, but when you're
Mm-hmm.
having a customer immersion study or interviewing them for research purposes, it's just going to be a free flowing conversation. Give them as natural a habitat as possible. If possible, go visit their homes and see how they think about it, how they use it, what they look at before buying. I think that is the biggest thing. And the reason I have said that in my previous interviews is because I was a management consultant after my MBA in the US and Canada. So
Mm-hmm.
there, your whole job is to have a hypothesis, and you're paid for it. And then here I am as an entrepreneur, failed two times, and third time I finally learned that I have to unlearn the whole thing of consulting. I have to go with the mindset that I will be completely open minded and let consumers lead me by what their behavior says. And that's why it was a longer unlearning process for me. And yes.
Wow, again, like, this is great. I mean, like, for anybody young who's listening, especially for me, I think these are great cues, because it's very easy to think that, just go out there and ask the consumer, what do you want? But if they knew what they want, then, like, you have to be able to observe, and, you, as you said, ask open-ended questions. And I always used to wonder, there's no Brian Chesky story of how Airbnb and they went to, homes to photograph people. But now I do have an Indian ecosystem story where you both went to homes and, actually delivered and went across the entire experience of the buying cycle for the consumer. So love that story, and thanks to that, Chaitanya. Moving ahead to, again, something very interesting, right? So, when we talk about entrepreneurs, and again, this is, I think, if it is a misconception or not, you'll be able to rectify that better. But the growth versus profitability debate, right? So when you are getting consumers, people in a very, very vague way talk about, just keep growing, keep doubling down, and the revenues will follow, the profitability will follow. And there's a lot of jargon around it as well. But you have from day one, along with your co-founder, of course, focused on profitability, right? So can you perhaps tell us a bit more about how did you approach it internally, and what your advice in a subjective, open-ended form will be also for young builders who want to build the companies of their dream?
Sure. I think there are two misconceptions. The first misconception is that every startup has to be extremely loss making in order to grow rapidly.
Yeah.
Second misconception is that every sector has the same unit economics, where you end up making a lot of loss for the few months or years and then it becomes profitable. Both are wrong. In the first question, uh, that kind of a growth at all costs, where you sacrifice profitability, is very, very well suited in a winner take all market, where the network effects ultimately drive the success of the startup.
Right.
So in ride hailing, for example, there couldn't be 10 ride hailing apps because it's a winner take all.
Mhm.
It is not going to sustain. Not everybody is going to make losses. Not users are not going to download 10 apps and compare which one is better. So it's always going to be one or maximum two that's ending up surviving and taking bulk of the benefits.
Right.
Then look at a funding marketplace. So if it's a funding marketplace where startups are trying to raise money, you will see that worldwide there is AngelList or somebody like that, which is just taken all of the network benefits, because there cannot be four or five such platforms where startups are going and registering everywhere, investors are going and registering everywhere. It just does not pan out. So
Mhm.
in such a market, it is very, very logical to sacrifice profitability and pour all your focus on growth. Even look at social network. When Pinterest, when Facebook, all of them postponed their monetization and said, we want to be free. We want to just grow at all costs. That was because of that. There couldn't be two or three Facebooks. The
Right.
users would get split and it was not going to happen. So in such a place, it's very, very logical to go ahead and do that.
Mm.
And that is why people have mistakenly applied that logic to every sector, every other startup, saying that if I have to grow fast, I will have to lose money.
Right.
Second thing is, there are a lot of sectors where you do not need too much capital to kickstart the cycle.
Mhm.
However, again, people don't think like that. Startup means I have to lose money. So
Mm.
when we started, it was 2-3 lakhs of Ankit's money, 2-3 lakhs of my money, and how and we barely scraped together everything. We didn't take salaries for a lot of time. We just worked on the credit cycle and ensured that payment was happening on time. Customers were paying us on time. Simple mathematics, simple accounting, and we said, okay, we will survive on that. So
Mhm.
that got us to 6 crore in year one. Obviously, timing was right. Obviously, we worked hard. Obviously, because we were the first guys, it sort of helped us in this sector. All of that enabling factors were there. But at the same time, that's all we did. Simple running the company in a fundamental, solid way. And the reason we did that was, again, we had been in funded startups as employees. We had seen other companies blowing through hundreds of crores in 6 months. This was the crazy boom time of 2015 to 17. Yeah, startups were raising hundreds of crores and blowing through it in about 6 to 7 months just to get to the next milestone. So we said, boss, we don't want to be dependent on VC money for survival, because finally, after so many failed attempts, one company has worked. Now we don't want to risk its existence by making it dependent on VC money.
Right.
So that made us say that, okay, let's run it through internal accruals. And whenever, if at all, we get successful in raising funding, we will use that purely as jet fuel to do what we have been doing well.
Right.
And that is why. the growth versus profitability was never a debate between us. Uh, and thankfully, the investors that have come in, the board that has been there with us,
Mhm.
they've been supportive of our vision that we want to build it this way.
Very glad to hear that, and it's very evident as well that you've not compromised on speed, and that's a misconception that is there, right? If you choose profitability, it's not like it's a trade-off, right? You have gone ahead with both in this case, and you've done it very well. So that's a great pointer, and again, you've laid it out in the most sublime manner I could think of. So glad to hear that. Moving ahead to, so this is going to be, the next 5 minutes are going to be my most favorite, because I am a true fan of your consumer service and you living up to the entire phrase customer is the king. So I'd love for you to play, probably, in the most practical sense of it, lay down the different things you've done, because I'm aware that there's a 100-day warranty. Then there are other things, like you go on the website, there is an entire survey on how well are you sleeping, right? And there are so many different things that you've done over the years, the sleep internship, multiple different ads. So it'd be great to, probably, if you can lay down a framework for the audience as to how you've approached it. We understand that it's a huge emphasis, probably the top of priority for you as a company, but how have you approached it in practicality, and what's been the iterative process, like, after each step, what have you observed, and then maybe gone ahead and done something different again? So that'd be great to hear.
Sure. Maybe the sleep internship and other brand related activities we can talk separately.
Sure.
But the
Right.
customer is king, what you asked is very, very close to our heart.
Right.
Uh, uh, I think people just simply think that customer is king means just follow everything that they say, whether they're being reasonable, unreasonable, whether they're abusive. People think that just follow anything. That is what the meaning of that is. But in fact, it is not.
Hmm.
Uh, and Most rules are made for the 1% of customers who are bad actors.
Hmm.
And because of those rules, 99% of genuinely good customers suffer.
Wow. Yeah.
So, how many people actually misuse your returns policy? How many people actually misuse your warranty policy? Very few, right? They're all normal, middle class, just like us. So they'll buy it, they'll start using it, they'll be happy, their kids spend time on it, they spend time on it. They're just a happy family, normal, very normal middle class people. But there are these 1% or half a percent of people who misuse it.
Hmm.
They'll shout at you, they'll use abusive words, they'll completely order 2 3 products and return it at the end of the 99th day. They'll do all of those things. But if you make rules for everybody
Hmm.
based on the behavior of this 1%, you're getting normal people also to suffer.
Right.
So we said, yes, there are going to be unreasonable customers. Yes, there are going to be completely unhappy customers who are not unhappy for our reasons, but whatever is going on in their life.
Hmm.
uh, People who are abusive, people who don't treat us with respect, but it's okay. Let us ignore them. As a brand, we have to face it. We cannot do anything to that, and we just hope that they get better. We wish them the best, and we move on. We take that as a hit. But the remaining 99 customers are in our hand. What can we do make them happy? Can we give them promised EDD, expected delivery date? Can we achieve that? Can we give, when we give them a warranty, can we actually truly honor that? Can we give, when we say 100-day trial and this person has used it and genuinely it has started coming apart, the stitching is coming apart, or the zipper is come off, okay, it is under the trial policy, we have to honor it.
Right.
So these, when you find out and when you talk to people, you'll be amazed at how simple and normal and genuine their concerns are.
Right.
So customer is king for us is that identifying these genuine customers and making them happy no matter what. Identifying these unreasonable customers and letting them go with the best wishes. That is customer is king for us.
Wow, wow. That's again put in such a simplified manner that it's great, because if we can all recognize this, because as you said, we dominate and we behave according to the worst, but we have to focus on, the generalized, which is the good crowd. And it's great to hear that ideology. Furthermore, again, you have another great principle which I caught off one of your interviews. In the fact that you mentioned that when you were shutting down your second startup, you mentioned that you made sure that all of your employees actually got another job, and that was one of your pivotal roles while shutting it down, right? And that's something which people don't talk of, right? People can talk about what I learned, what I gained, and things like that, consider it as a failure, success, things like that. But this was something that I saw a lot of empathy in, right? And it goes to show that when I was in coordination with the PR heads of your team, they were replying to my emails at 11:30 as well, which is not what you see from most employees. So what I'm trying to now add is, how do you look at employee success? We can go into like hiring a later time, and we can go into other things a later time if at all. But how do you look at employee success within the company? What are some of the things that you are doing with your co-founder to make sure that the experience in Wakefit is very comprehensive for employees working there?
Got it. I think all of us are looking for a purpose in life, which is beyond money.
Right.
And if it is just money and that is what keeps you in a job and that's what makes you get up and go to work every day, it's not really a fulfilling life. Uh, and it means that you are not really living up to your full potential
Mhm.
as a human being. So if you have that purpose in life, nobody needs to tell you to take responsibility. Nobody needs to say wake up and do this or respond at late at night. I have not told my team to respond at 11:30.
Right.
I have I when there is a sale event, I don't tell my team to respond to customer tickets till 3 a.m. They do it. Nobody tells them. And those days they suffer because they see the customers suffering.
Mm.
Those days they are on that dream because we are on building a dream of a company, saying that can we make this a truly transformative company that lives beyond us. So that is the vision, that is the ambition. You cannot put a revenue number to it, you cannot put a fundraise number to it. I cannot say at $1 billion revenue I will be happy. So what happens when you get there? Will you lose your motivation? That's a very limited way of thinking. If you really have to open your horizons and put those goals, it is building a company that will truly outlast you, building a company that can become an institution where anybody who wants to leave Wakefit leaves happily and says, I was part of that company during that phase.
Right.
So when somebody resigns, I touch wood, most of my core team has just remained throughout. But if somebody does leave, I always say, are you happy leaving? Is that better opportunity better? Then please go ahead. I will support it. I will give you my reference letter. Because if you're there's no point holding them back just by offering a little bit money, a little bit new role, because if they're unhappy, they're unhappy. So this vision is not for them. It's okay. So our idea is that so employee success is, can you give them that dream and a vision, and then can you give them the autonomy to execute within their complete unlimited means to achieve that, and can they become better and better people every year. The same core team 4 years ago, how they were and how they are now, it makes me proud when they get married, they take a car loan, they build a new house, they book an apartment, they go out and win an award in a marketing conference. That makes me proud. So that cannot be exchanged for anything else.
Wow, wow. Again, this kind of a founder mentality can be with everyone, because it's, as you said, you're building a legacy which lasts, outlives you, and you're creating that happy space and giving everybody a purpose, a dream, which is all spectacular. Chaitanya, I'm absolutely loving the line of answering, and thanks again. I know I'm doing this too often, but it's absolutely great. But moving on to again something which is very peculiar and interesting about what you've built is the brand, right? So there are so many components that you've done well in silos, yet they connect so well in constellation, right? So talking about that itself, how has brand building been for you? As you mentioned that you started off brand building at a later stage, or if not, that might be not the right way to put it, because brand was being built by word of mouth for sure. But how do you look at brand building and the entire concept of doing things right and making sure a larger pool of people get to hear about you?
Got it. At the most base level, a brand is nothing but a promise.
Right.
So either you're meeting that promise or you're not meeting that promise, and then people go out and talk about that. Uh, what in common parlance we call brand building is nothing but awareness building.
Mhm.
So it's not necessarily brand building. So the for us, brand building is always through every one of our employees and through every one of our touch points and through every one of the promises that we keep and meet. Delivery, discount, warranty, trial policy. Each of those is a brand building strategy for us.
Yeah.
Now, to coming to the awareness building part of it, uh, we people are now flooded with a ton of different stimuli throughout the day.
Mhm.
There was a small study done by, I don't know, I think one of the Nielsen's or one of those research agencies, that in a typical day, a consumer, he'll get out, he'll see some notifications on his app, then he'll start driving, radio will blare the ads, then uh, hoardings on the autos and vehicles in front of you, and then you get to office, notifications, Facebook, WhatsApp, people are sharing, and then you do the same thing on the way back home. In a typical day, you see thousands of these stimuli where different brands are trying to compete for your attention.
Mhm.
And they're saying, I am better in this sphere. So, if you have to build awareness in such a cluttered space, you have to do something really worthwhile that money cannot buy,
Right.
that ad spend cannot buy. So, if you have to do it in a worthwhile manner, it cannot be just running another ad with some more money. It has to be on the strength of the content. So when we did the sleep internship campaign in 2019, season one, when the lockdown happened, we did those open letters where the Bartan Dholia video went really crazily viral.
Yeah.
Then recently we did 2020 wrap up. We did Bhadmeja 2020.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so this is really something that we enjoy doing. That
Mhm.
as a marketing team, we really love that work. And if it makes us laugh, and if it gets other people, millions of other people happiness, and it is adding value to their life, that is truly clutter breaking.
Right.
So that is the idea. It can we continuously think and work on the merit of an idea, not just start in the reverse way. If you go talk to any other big company,
Mhm.
marketing conversation starts with money. They say the budget for this campaign is 25 lakhs. This is how I can allocate this. What can you do in this? For us, we don't look at money at all. Is
Mhm.
the idea worthwhile? Will
Right.
people really talk about it? Will they share about it? Is it adding value to their lives? Why would Jivraj, sitting in a particular city of a particular age and profession, why would he go and share it?
Right.
So if the answer to that is unclear, then that campaign is never going to succeed, even if I pour 10 crores behind it.
Right.
But if the answer to that is clear in our head as a marketing team and as a creative partner, Spring, that you're interviewing next time some week, if that is clear, then no money is needed to make it viral. People automatically share it on WhatsApp, on Facebook, on Google, on Instagram. So I think for us, we have looked at awareness building in that way, saying that keep money out of the equation. Look at the strength of the idea. If
Right.
that works, you don't have to worry about the budget.
Got it. Got it. Great, great to understand that and understand that ideology to be able to be at it and look at things differently in terms of instead of actually looking at just on a metric basis and what did this do, what is the budget, what will this convert, ROI and stuff like that. That's a great way to approach marketing, branding, and great line of answering again. Furthermore, I want to talk a bit about, let's say, competition, right? And that goes without saying. So when you started off, you were creating a category. Now you're running for competition, and also you're consolidating when you're challenging players which have been in the market for 50, 60 years, right? So as a brand, as a company, what are the kind of things you do to, build moats, as they call it, around your company that things cannot be challenged? While I understand, like from the outside, it can seem like a loyal consumer base is something that is always there. There is trust, there is a community factor. All of these things are there. What's the internal model like to make sure that we strive ahead and we keep doing what we do best?
Uh, See, it would be foolish not to look at your competitive landscape.
Mm.
But I would say that it would be equally foolish if you base a lot of your decisions on based on the competitive landscape's behavior.
Right.
Uh, because then where is your identity?
Right.
What do you stand for? What is dear to your heart, which you will never sacrifice no matter what?
Mhm.
So that is how truly great companies get built. Amazon stands for widest possible selection at the most affordable price point. They will do anything to achieve that.
Mhm.
Um, you look at Xiaomi, really high end specifications, but a super affordable price point. So they stand for it. And uh, there were other companies in the same price point. There were other companies doing similar service, but these companies stood out because that was their identity. And
Mhm.
identity is something that you cannot put on a show for.
Mhm.
If you're putting on a show and behaving like it is your identity, sooner or later that face or mask is going to come off. It's very tough to maintain a facade if you don't really believe it.
Right.
Finally, you're talking customer centric, and internally, if your Slack messages and chat messages show that, "Arey, this customer bhad mein jaye, let him go write whatever. I will take him to court." So if you're truly saying it, that means every aspect of your behavior, whether somebody goes and posts your Slack messages outside in public, somebody takes screenshots of your WhatsApp, somebody secretly records your phone calls, nothing should matter to you because you're truly the same everywhere.
Right.
You're truly saying and behaving the same way everywhere. I
Right.
think that would be the philosophy of building a moat. And for us, that would be, if we are a pioneering D2C company
Mhm.
in an industry that has completely non-standardized products, it better mean that we are constantly pushing the boundary on better products at lower price points. So
Right.
nobody is asking us to improve the product. Nobody is asking us to drop the prices, but we are doing it on our own accord,
Right.
uh, because that is true to us. And no matter what, we will continue to do that. And no matter what, Ankit and I will continue to see negative reviews and lose sleep over it. So simple things, right? That who will copy it? How will you copy it?
Right.
So some other competitors will find other modes or other DNA. That's their prerogative. You have to be aware of your competitive landscape, but stay true to who you are as an identity.
Right, right, right. Wonderful to hear that. And I have one last question on, let's say, WakeFit, and then we'll move to a final segment where we can conclude while we talk about a bit about you, right? So this is in regards to product expansion, right? So you started off with mattresses, from what I can gather, and there are a wide range of sleep wellness products. That's what the company stands for, and WakeFit, as I know it, is a sleep solutions company, right? So when you're rolling out new products, is there like an internal, let's say, roadmap to, let's say, approach it? You know, how much of it is actually iterative and prototyping and pilot testing within the company? Then how do you exactly go about a rollout? Is it, you know, let's go after the entire market all at once, or let's go after the existing consumer base? Like, you know, these fundamental things that might be, you know, seeming very complex from the outside. It'll be great if you can give us an internal look of the same.
Sure. Actually, in the last 12 months, we have evolved into becoming a sleep and home solutions provider,
Right, right.
uh,
I see.
which means now we have sofas, wardrobes,
Right.
coffee tables, beds, bedside tables. Soon, dining tables will also be launched.
Nice.
And this whole thing is already forming a substantial chunk of our monthly revenue.
Right.
Uh, the philosophy of identifying a space and launching a new product has always been the same, which is, can you look at a product that is out there,
Mhm.
find a place where you can improve it ergonomically, scientifically, engineer in an engineering manner, and can you do it at a better price point while being profitable?
Right.
So the simple rules. For example, we would never get into a product which is going to be 1 lakh rupee product, and we will sell five of them a day. Really high margins, very profitable. I don't think that excites us as a company.
Right.
So can we find that space where we can serve millions and millions of people by improving something that is already there,
Right.
but at a better price point while remaining profitable?
Right.
If the answer is yes, we get into that space. And obviously, it has to be in aligned spaces. We would not get into food, we would not get into hyper local. Um, we would get into our home space. So, anything around bedroom, sleep, home, anything that improves the quality of life at home, we would love to expand into. And that's the framework or lens that we apply on the next white space.
Right.
Uh, and we have a lot of plans for the coming years also, but all of it is based on data. And what parameters I just now told you has data and mathematics behind it.
Right.
Is there enough demand? If yes, how do we make that product better? Go down to the costing level and raw material level, backward integration level. And once that costing is proven, can we do it at a price point where we are still profitable?
Right.
Uh, and the answer to all three mathematics answers questions is yes. Then yes, the answer is to launch it.
Wow, great, great. Glad to hear that again. And that exhibits, again, first principles thinking and approaching it in a very methodological manner. So wonderful to hear that. And that line of answering was wonderful. Now, moving to, let's say you, and let's talk a bit about you as a founder and how things have progressed for you, right? So, at the very, basic level to set context, what kind of a founder are you, right? Are you the one that keeps hustling? Are you the one that is a complete team member who's always brainstorming? Are you the administrator? Are you the angry boss? What is it like for you in office and beyond? And what's life as a founder for you at Wakefit?
I hope when I describe myself, I hope my team also aligns with what I'm saying and they don't have a very different view of who I am. And I hope I am self aware enough to see the positives and the negatives in myself.
Right.
Uh, I think I try to be as calm as possible,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and as clear headed as possible, because the responsibility as a founder is that if you as a founder, uh, you'll be confused. As a founder, there are no clear answers, and you're constantly making decisions based on partial data.
Mm-hmm.
But if you translate every one of those confusions onto your team, it becomes a big whiplash effect.
Mm-hmm.
So confusion is very small in your head, but you're dealing with 20 such things. Your direct reports take it up and amplify it by about 10-15%.
Mm-hmm.
They then amplify that confusion to their respective teams by another 20-25%.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, when it goes down to the junior most person in the company, they don't know what the hell they are doing on a daily basis. So I've seen this happen in startups that I have worked, in startups that I have seen, startups that I have read, startups that I've invested in. So when I say I try to be calm and clear-headed, it is because I am trying to absorb all of this confusion, all of these questions, and trying to come up with as clear thought processes and answers as possible, and ensure that the team has a clear vision. The team has a clear goal. We might change the paths to get to the vision, but the vision should not change. They should not feel that we are constantly confused about their existence itself.
Right.
That is a very bad place to be as an employee, a very bad place to be as a direct report, a very bad place to be as a person who's chasing a dream. Then
Mm.
it feels like what is the purpose of my life?
Right.
So I think I try to be that to the best extent possible, as calm and as clear-headed as possible. That hopefully will help the company as well as the team that I work with.
Right, right. Glad to hear that. And I think it's very exhibitory and explanatory because through the interview itself, like I've had such a treat and understanding so plainly and in a clean way what you've been trying to communicate. And the calmness is also something that exhibits. So really glad and some wonderful traits there. In the next question, I want to understand that, as a founder, I'm sure there are a lot of administrative troubles as well. And there's a long priority list, right? Because there's so much on your plate, essentially, right? You're managing the organization, you're looking at reviews, you're looking at sales, you're looking at metrics, and you have to report to investors, a lot of different things that may or may not apply to you. But what I essentially want to understand from you that, at the stage where you are, where you have crores in revenue and you're scaling the organization up as well, how do you essentially prioritize, and what do you keep your eye on no matter what? I understand that consumer is what you keep your eye on, but beyond that as well, how does your priority list reflect, and how do you go about deciding that this is something I need to focus on more than the others? And how do you keep innovating even at scale? Because you might get subject to, let's say, a manual process, a process of winning, right? That also in its sense is non-innovative in nature, because once you get in it, you're just winning, but you're not winning asymmetrically, right? So if you can probably throw some light on that, that'd be wonderful.
Sure. I'll talk about the two aspects. The second one is innovation. How do you remain innovative? And the first one is prioritization framework. Uh, so, as the company becomes bigger and bigger, the one thing you're going to realize is no matter how superhuman you think you are as a founder, there is no way you can do a good job of prioritizing and taking all the decisions that need to be taken on a daily basis.
Right.
So, the really scalable answer to that is explain the dream to your team, get them on board to that team on that dream. And once you get them on board, give them broad guardrails saying that we can never treat a customer like this. We can
Mm.
never go back on a promise that we have made. We would never think of solving a problem first with money. It has to be solved with brain power. Simple guardrails, and then let them take the decisions. And when they do make mistakes, don't shoot the messenger. It's the cost of growing the company. So if thousands of decisions have to be taken, it means you have to get the team to take those decisions. You cannot take all those decisions, and invariably they will make mistakes.
Mm.
So if the mistakes are not repeated, if the mistakes don't breach the fundamental principles of the company, then it's okay. Teach them the lesson and move forward. If they're breaching the fundamental principles, then maybe it is time to part ways because they're not part of this decision. They're not part of the dream that you're trying to build. So prioritization is always that. And I also try to carve out 1.5 to 2 hours and every day, as difficult as it is, to simply do what I call deep thinking. Is there a way? And I'm very old-fashioned. I use a fountain pen. I use a book. So, is there a way that without distraction, I can just sit and write a few points, uh, solve things that are bothering me? Because when you're working on the laptop or on the phone, there's constant notifications, there's constant distractions. Somebody's calling you, so can you find those windows of time where you're just thinking about the company, about the problems, because that is where ultimate solutions come from. So that's how I look at and do the really deep thinking ones on your own, and ensure that the team is taking those decisions. I think though that's a combination that works for me. In terms of innovation, uh, I told you that we would love to build a company that outlasts us, and so in the initial years, a lot of the innovative decisions, thinking, which products to launch, what policies to do, were all coming from us. But now we are very fortunate to have a very loyal and core team in finance, in growth, in marketing, in technology, in operations, in production, logistics. And so from now on, the innovative ideas have to come from everywhere in the company. You cannot run an innovation day where one day everybody will think about innovation. You cannot run an innovation competition. You cannot say innovation can come only from certain seniority people. All of that is nonsense. Innovation can come and should come from everywhere across the company, because those are your arms and legs. Those are the people who are constantly talking to customers. So if you don't ignore those signals, you will automatically be an innovative company.
Right.
uh, if you ignore those symptoms, or you take those symptoms but put them into a preconceived hypothesis that we initially talked about, then both of those are big red flags.
Right.
So even though I've running the company for 5 years, the first thing that Ankita and I say is, yes, we don't know this.
Right.
If customers are behaving like this or saying this, let us go down to the bottom and see what it is. I will not say this is why they are behaving like this. I know, I am fine from here from 5 years. That's nonsense.
Right.
So okay, those are the two things, sort of a beginner's mindset in what you do, and ensuring that ideas across the company keep bubbling over. Those are the two ways in which you probably can remain relevantly innovative, not innovation for the sake of innovation.
Wow, again, that's awesome to hear. And you use the word beginner's mindset, and that's so spectacular to hear because I'm sure like founders can tend to also get overwhelmed, and the know it all attitude can be there. but it's great to see that you're constantly learning and you're constantly, giving others a chance. And it's not just centered around you or Ankit. It's the dream, it's the entire company, it's the entire organization, and you're speaking like a true founder. And I'm sure it's like a testament to the amazing journey. My second last question is in terms of, one of your quotes again, like if I may quote you, you mentioned that, people underestimate what it takes to build a company, along the lines of, the hard work that goes into it. And I'm sure there are days which you are not feeling as motivated, or at least there were, right? Because given the scale you've now achieved, I hope, and at least looks from the outside that things are still under control, and I'm sure the pathway is great to go. But how do you cope up with those internal, uh, initial bubbles or initial pitfalls that exist, and how do you go about choosing your way wisely then, and not giving up but still going towards what you want to achieve, especially given that you had two not so great starts to your career or to the entrepreneurship spectrum?
I think different people deal with it differently. It's a function of their own personality. Uh, some people choose to have mentors. Some people choose to have coaches. Some people choose to have a very close founder network
Hmm.
where they're all in a similar space of journey. They might be in different sectors, but they exchange notes. They meet for a beer. They meet for breakfast. They go on a bike ride. And different people have different ways of dealing with this. For me, it was reading and walking. I think I must have ghissoed enough number of shoes walking and thinking about my startups. I must have read hundreds of books because I think the answers are always out there. You just need to know where to look and how to look. And I've always been fortunate to have friends and people and well wishers and Twitter lists sort of recommend the right podcasts, right books, right people to follow because the answers lie there. You just have to open up your mind to say that, Hare, this problem ke liye what this guy is saying might fit. So that we sort of ignore the subconscious power of the brain, and it's always processing, it's always thinking, and the more raw material you give from other journeys, other best practices, what has worked, what has failed, it automatically comes up with the answer. So you need to that's how I work. I'm not saying this is for everybody. So this reading and processing and thinking and walking sort of helps me, uh, and that's how I deal with it. But yes, you're absolutely right. In my previous startups as well as the early days of wakefit, the journey can be lonely, where the pitfalls seem very big, and the successes can seem very transitory. uh, so those are tough times, so you find your own answer to how you overcome it. But it's very important that you also safeguard your mental health. It's rare and interesting that you're asking this question, so I love it. Founders, I cannot overstate the importance of taking care of your mental health, because there are going to be really jubilant times and there are going to be really depressing times. And sometimes they don't come in the same cycle, they come one after the other. And you need to build that resilience, you need to have the support system, you need to have a way to deal with it and process with it no matter what, that suits your personality. But I would recommend that strongly.
Wow, again, great pointer there, and a great note that, you can't sacrifice. Like, it's not supposed to be all hustle, all work, and you can't go mad over your dream. There has to be a process to it. You can figure it out by yourself, but you have to. And it's great how your product also helps that, because one of the things that I find really attractive is it's not just a commodity, right? It's a commodity that makes life better. And I've seen you mention how sleep is a very important factor, which we all again let go. And it's a cool thing to say that I sleep only 5 hours, I don't sleep well, I'm working for 20 hours, but it shouldn't be that way. And I love the emphasis on it. Also, side note, I love the fact that you mentioned about podcasts, that that can help you and give you answers, because I guess that's the aim of me being able to create this as well. And it's glad you feel that way as well, reinforces the belief. For the last question, Chaitanya, this has been fairly, I mean, this has exceeded all expectations for me, and I've loved the entire episode to a great extent. I wouldn't be able to do justice to summarizing it, but for the lack of a, let's go with the stereotypical ending where I would love to understand from you and get some parting lessons from you, because from what I can gather, it's been a great career and I'm sure it's going to be an awesome one even going ahead. But if you can, let's say, go back 20 years and tell yourself something, and take that same analogy to tell the 20-year-old something of the current generation, something from your years of experience, what would that be? It'll be very, very interesting to know.
I don't know. When I think back, I don't think I would change much with my life,
Mhm.
uh, because every single failed attempt at career, personal level, every single trip that I have taken, every single journey that I have taken, uh, every single risk that I have taken, I think it's all paid off in making me who I am today. So to think that I could give advice to my 20-year-old self to do something different seems a little show offy. I think I probably would not change much with my life.
Mhm.
I'm very blessed to be where I am, very blessed to have found purpose, very blessed to have been doing something that I love, to wake up and get to work every day with a team that I love engaging with. Um, and and every single one of the mishaps, every single misstep, every single positive thing has made me who I am. So I would probably just tell my 20-year-old self that don't worry, it will pan out. uh,
Right.
just keep putting in the hard work. This whole hustle and jugaad and all, it's just really been done to death. I think just it's okay. Stop and smell the roses. It's okay. Read a nice book. It's okay. Take a nice bike ride. And but never stop the hard work. Things will work out. I think it's a simple thing that I would probably leave my 20-year-old self with.
Wow. So we leave the episode with the note of hope. It will work out, and take your time, or take your process, but never stop working hard. Wonderful, wonderful way to end the episode. Thank you so much, Chaitanya, for your time. It's been such an honor to be able to host you, and rooting for WakeFit to become huge as the years go by. And thanks again for your time.
Thank you for the good wishes, and thanks for having me, Jivraj. All the best.
Thank you so much for joining in, guys. I absolutely loved the episode, and I'm hoping you loved it too. If you did, do not forget to subscribe to the channel for one episode per week exclusively on the Indian Silicon Valley podcast. That was me, Jivraj, your host for the show. If you never try, you never know. Stay tuned and keep building.